train slowed as it approached the station. Not a city, not a town, just open land, cold air, and a building waiting in the distance. Patients stepped down carrying suitcases. Some carried nothing at all. They were told this was treatment. They were told this was temporary. None of them were told how rarely anyone came back. More than a century later, workers climbed into an abandoned attic and found those suitcases still there. Hundreds of them, each marked with a name. No return addresses, no release dates, because the people who brought them were never expected to leave. In the mid-19th century, the United States faced a growing problem it did not know how to name. Industrialization crowded cities. Immigration surged. Families fractured under poverty, illness, and exhaustion. Mental illness was not understood as it is today. It was categorized, sorted, and judged. Those who could not work, could not conform, or could not be explained were labeled insane. And for those deemed chronic, incurable, society believed separation was mercy. In 1869, New York State opened the Willard Asylum for the chronic insane, overlooking Seneca Lake. It was designed not for recovery, but for permanence. This was not hidden, it was policy. Willard functioned with bureaucratic efficiency. Patients were sent by counties to reduce local costs. Once admitted, the county paid a fee. The state assumed control, belongings were cataloged, clothes were replaced, hair was cut, identity became administrative. Patients were assigned wards based on behavior, obedience, and usefulness. Work was mandatory and described as therapy. Men labored in fields, barns, and workshops. Women cooked, cleaned, laundered, and sewed. This labor sustained the asylum. It also justified long stays. The longer someone remained, the less likely anyone questioned why. Discharge required proof of recovery. Recovery was rarely reassessed. Time itself became the diagnosis. Records show people admitted for reasons that today do not resemble illness, a woman grieving the death of a child, a man described as melancholic after unemployment, teenagers labeled unmanageable, postpartum depression, alcoholism, loneliness. Immigrants arrived speaking German, Italian, or Polish. Inside Willard, language disappeared. Families visited at first. Letters were written. Some were answered. Then visits slowed. Letters stopped. Eventually, the outside world moved on. Willard did not forget them. It absorbed them. Days followed bells. Wake, work, meals, sleep. Meals were eaten in silence. Talking was discouraged. Privacy did not exist. Dormitories held dozens. Personal possessions were minimal. Individuality was inconvenient. Illness spread easily. Tuberculosis, influenza, pneumonia. Medical care existed, but resources were limited. Patients were numerous. Staff were few. Deaths were recorded. Names, dates, causes. Rarely stories. By the late 1800s, something became clear. Patients were not leaving. Some had been there 10 years, some 20, some 30. A woman admitted at 25 died at 72. A man committed for grief never returned home. They aged inside the system. Willard became a place where people waited until they no longer existed. There was no riot, no uprising. The horror revealed itself in scale. By the early 20th century, Willard was overcrowded. Wards expanded, beds multiplied. Patients were no longer described as individuals. They were numbers. The institution's purpose subtly shifted. It was no longer about care, it was about containment. Containment was considered success. Oversight existed on paper. Inspections were scheduled. Reports praised order and cleanliness. Recovery was not measured, only calm. Patient files grew thinner over time. Reevaluations were rare, transfers almost non-existent. When patients died, families were sometimes notified, sometimes not. Bodies were buried on asylum grounds. Graves were marked with numbers, not names. Some names were never spoken again. When Willard closed in 1995, the building was abandoned. Years later, workers entered the attic. They found suitcases, hundreds of them. Inside were wedding dresses, photographs, baby shoes, Bibles, letters never sent. Every suitcase had been stored when its owner arrived. None had been opened again. They were packed for a stay that was never meant to end. Willard closed as part of America's deinstitutionalization movement. Patients were transferred. Facilities shut down. Accountability never arrived. Because Willard had followed the law. Doctors signed the papers. Courts approved commitments. Counties paid the fees. What happened there was not abuse by one person. It was neglect by an entire system. Mental hospitals closed. But people still disappeared into institutions. Nursing homes, prisons, shelters, different names, same invisibility. Records were lost. Graves remain unidentified. Families still search. Willard was not an anomaly. It was a mirror, a reflection of what happens when a society decides some lives are too complicated to return. No chains were needed. No violence was required. Only paperwork, silence, and time. The suitcases remain, waiting for people who were never allowed to go home.